The moment she said the words, "You're just a guest here, mother," something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, clean break that I could feel in my bones. I'd lived in that house for over 30 years. I'd planted the magnolia tree out front with my late husband, Richard. I'd chosen the curtains, the paint, even the old rocking chair by the window where my grandson, Ethan, had taken his first steps. Every inch of that place carried a memory, my memories. But now, standing in my own living room with my daughter-in-law glaring at me like I was some intruder, it suddenly felt like I didn't belong anymore. My name is Margaret, and I've always believed that families are built on love, patience, and respect. I raised my son, David, on those very values. I worked 2 jobs after Richard passed just to make sure he could go to college and have a better life. When David married Vanessa, I thought my heart would burst with pride. She was charming, articulate, and seemed to love my son deeply. At least, that's what I believed back then. In the beginning, Vanessa treated me like family. She'd bring me tea when I wasn't feeling well, ask for my old recipes, and call me Mom in that sweet, soft voice that always felt genuine. I'd tell my friends how lucky I was, how blessed I felt that my son had found a woman who respected his mother. But people change. Or maybe, masks slip. It started with small things. A sigh when I offered to help in the kitchen. A polite but dismissive, "Oh, don't worry, I've got it." The first time, I brushed it off. She was young. Maybe she just wanted to prove herself. But as time went on, the distance between us grew thicker than fog. When David suggested that I move in with them after my hip surgery, Vanessa's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course," she said, "it's your mother, we'll make it work." But I could feel it, the strain, the hesitation. Still, I convinced myself it was all in my head. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. I kept to myself, cooked occasionally, and helped around the house. Ethan, my grandson, adored me. We'd spend hours reading together or baking cookies. I thought maybe we'd found a rhythm. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon. Vanessa had invited her friends over for lunch, young mothers with perfect hair and glossy smiles. I stayed mostly out of the way, helping set the table and making sure Ethan didn't spill juice on the carpet. When one of her friends asked, "Who's that lovely lady?" Vanessa replied, without a flicker of emotion, "Oh, that's David's mom. She's just staying with us for a while, kind of like a guest." A guest. The word stung, but I said nothing. I laughed it off, pretending not to notice the quick exchange of glances around the table. That night, when I asked her about it gently, without accusation, she smiled that tight, practiced smile of hers and said, "Well, you are, aren't you? Guests don't stay forever." Her words felt like ice water down my spine. I wanted to believe she didn't mean it, that she was tired or frustrated, or maybe just careless with her words. But deep down, I knew better. Something in her tone told me this wasn't a slip, it was a warning. I went to bed that night replaying her voice in my head. Just a guest. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the home I'd built with love could feel so foreign. In the morning, I made her coffee, just the way she liked it, oat milk, 2 sugars, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But every time she looked at me, there was a flicker of something sharp behind her smile. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But my instincts whispered what my heart didn't want to hear. This wasn't just about space. Or pride. Vanessa wanted me gone. And she had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. The days after Vanessa called me a guest passed like a foggy dream, heavy, still, and hard to see through. I kept telling myself she didn't mean it. Maybe she'd been under stress, or maybe I was being too sensitive. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We forgive. We explain things away. But deep down, my instincts, the same instincts that had helped me survive widowhood and raise a son on my own, whispered that something wasn't right. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Little shifts in tone, small gestures, quick glances that carried unspoken meanings. Vanessa stopped leaving a plate for me at dinner. She'd make enough for 3, her, David, and Ethan, but I'd find myself reheating leftovers from the night before. When I asked if there was more chicken, she'd smile apologetically and say, "Oh, I didn't think you'd want any." You usually eat early. I didn't. Not until she started assuming I did. She began hosting more gatherings, book clubs, brunches, neighborhood meetings, and every time, she'd somehow forget to tell me until the doorbell rang. I'd be in my robe or sorting laundry when the house would suddenly fill with her friends, their laughter echoing off the walls I'd once painted with my husband. "Oh, sorry, Margaret," she'd say, brushing off my surprise. It was last minute. But it wasn't. I'd seen the printed invites on the counter the day before. The lies were small, harmless on their own, but together, they began to form a pattern. A quiet, calculated push toward the edges of my own home. David, my son, noticed none of it. He was buried in work, spending long hours at the office and collapsing into bed the moment he got home. When I tried to bring up my concerns, he'd smile tiredly and say, "Mom, Vanessa's just trying to juggle everything. Don't take it personally." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the unease kept growing. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen folding napkins when I overheard Vanessa on the phone. Her voice was hushed but sharp, edged with irritation. "Yes, she's still here," she said, pacing near the window. I know. David feels guilty. But I can't live like this much longer. It's too much." I froze, a napkin halfway folded in my trembling hands. I couldn't hear the other voice on the line, but Vanessa's tone told me enough. "Maybe after the holidays," she sighed. "He'll come around. He always does. After the holidays." That night, I barely touched my food. Vanessa talked cheerfully about a new family trip she was planning, to Florida, she said, to visit her parents. "It'll be nice to get away," she told David, "just the three of us." Just the three of us. I smiled politely, keeping my voice steady as I asked who would watch the house. She hesitated, just a blink, a split second, before saying, "Oh, we'll figure something out." I knew what she meant. It wasn't hatred. Not yet. It was something quieter, more insidious, the way she'd rearrange furniture without asking, replacing the family photos with ones of her own parents. The way she'd sigh whenever I offered advice, her lips tightening just enough to suggest annoyance. And then there was Ethan. Sweet, bright-eyed Ethan, who used to rush into my arms every morning for pancakes and stories. Lately, he'd been keeping his distance. I noticed it when I found his favorite storybook, the one we used to read every night, tucked away in a box under the stairs. When I asked him about it, he looked down and said softly, "Mommy says I'm too old for that now." He's 6. I swallowed the ache in my throat and smiled, brushing his hair back. "Well, I think stories are for everyone, no matter how old you are." But as I tucked him into bed, I caught Vanessa watching from the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Later that night, as I lay awake, I replayed every little moment, every dismissive smile, every quiet exclusion, every word that made me doubt myself. Was I being paranoid? Was grief making me oversensitive? I thought of my late husband, Richard. He used to tell me, "Margie, when people show you who they are, believe them." But I didn't want to believe it. Not yet. Not about her. I convinced myself that maybe I was too set in my ways, too protective of my space. Maybe Vanessa just needed room to be the lady of the house, her house, as she saw it. Still, something deep inside me was shifting. I started noticing how she looked at me when David wasn't around, not with anger, but with calculation. The way a person studies a puzzle they're almost done solving. And in those silent, uneasy moments, a thought began to take root. Maybe she wasn't waiting for David to come around. Maybe she already had a plan. And I was standing right in the middle of it. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, the kind that hums with tension, where even the ticking of the clock sounds like it's warning you of something you can't yet see. That's what my home had become. Not a place of warmth and laughter anymore, but a place of quiet, creeping unease. And then, the truth came out. It was a Friday morning. The kind of morning where everything felt normal enough to fool you. The coffee pot gurgled, Ethan's laughter echoed from upstairs, and Vanessa hummed a tune in the kitchen while scrolling on her phone. For a brief moment, I almost forgot the ache in my chest, the gnawing suspicion that had been eating at me since that night I overheard her phone call. David had left early for work. Vanessa had gone upstairs to take a shower, leaving her phone on the counter. Normally, I would never touch it. I was raised better than that. But then the screen lit up a new message. I didn't mean to look, but the name caught my eye. Real estate agent, Michael. A message preview popped up beneath it. The buyer's offer for the house looks solid. Just need your confirmation to move forward. Once the paperwork's through, we can schedule the handover date. My stomach dropped. For a second, I couldn't move. My mind scrambled to make sense of the words, as if there had to be another explanation. Our house? What house? There was only one house, the one I had built, the one my husband and I had poured our lives into. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and opened the thread. There it was. Dozens of messages between Vanessa and this agent, dating back weeks. Conversations about timelines, appraisals, and keeping it discreet from the family. And then the one that nearly made me drop the phone. David won't notice until it's done. Once your mother-in-law moves out, we'll finalize. Buyers love the area. It's an easy sale. My heart pounded in my ears. Once your mother-in-law moves out. She was selling my house. The house my husband and I had built together from nothing. Every memory, every holiday, every photograph on the mantle, all of it was about to be sold like it meant nothing. And David, he didn't even know. I felt the air leave my lungs. My knees went weak, and I gripped the counter to steady myself. The room blurred as tears filled my eyes. My heart wasn't just breaking, it was shattering. I'd opened my home to her. I'd welcomed her as a daughter. And in return, she decided I was a guest, someone to quietly remove once I'd outlived my usefulness. The betrayal burned through me like acid. When she came downstairs, humming softly, her hair wrapped in a towel, I couldn't look at her. I placed her phone gently back on the counter and sat at the table, my mind spinning. "Everything okay, Margaret?" she asked casually, pouring herself coffee. I forced a smile. "Yes, dear. Everything's fine." Because what else could I say? "I know you're selling my house behind my back?" My voice would have cracked. My rage would have spilled out, raw and uncontrolled. No, I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I watched her. The way she moved around the kitchen like she already owned it. The way she scrolled through her phone, smiling to herself. I wondered if she was texting the agent again, or maybe gloating to a friend about how easy it was to fool an old woman. That night, I sat alone in my room, the silence pressing down on me. I looked at the framed photo of Richard on my dresser. He was smiling, holding a hammer from when we first broke ground on the house. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have protected it better." Guilt sank its claws deep into me. How could I have been so blind? I'd seen the signs, the coldness, the subtle disrespect, the way she isolated me, and I'd ignored them all because I didn't want to believe someone could be so cruel. But denial only delays the pain. By morning, my tears had dried, leaving behind something different. Something quieter, heavier. Anger. Not the wild, screaming kind that fades after an hour. No, this was the kind that simmers beneath the surface, sharp and deliberate. The kind that waits. I spent that day watching her more closely. How she smiled when she took a call outside, how she glanced at me with faint irritation when I walked into the room. I caught snippets of her whispering, always stepping away, always ending the conversation when she noticed me. Each detail was another thread in a web of deceit I hadn't wanted to see. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a single thought echoed through my mind like a mantra. You called me a guest in my own home. A guest. Fine. If that's how she wanted to see me, then I'd leave her something to remember me by. Because I wasn't just going to pack my bags. I was going to pack hers. And when I did, she'd finally understand what it felt like to lose everything she'd taken for granted. The calm before the storm had begun. The morning after I found out Vanessa was selling my house, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun had risen, staring at the magnolia tree outside. The same tree Richard and I had planted 35 years ago. Its branches swayed gently in the morning light, the leaves trembling in the wind, just like my hands. That tree had seen everything, our first Christmas in the house, David's birthday parties, even the day I stood under it alone after Richard's funeral, promising him I'd keep the home alive. And now, the woman my son called his wife was planning to sell it right from under us. The pain came in waves, disbelief first, then anger, then something darker. Helplessness. For most of my life, I'd been the kind of woman who put others first. I raised David single-handedly, worked double shifts at the diner, and still managed to pack lunches and show up at every school play. I'd built my world around family, around love and sacrifice. But as I sat there, listening to Vanessa hum upstairs, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I realized no one was coming to save me. Not David, he was too blinded by love and loyalty. Not Ethan, he was just a child, innocent and unknowing. And certainly not Vanessa, she was the storm I needed saving from. The truth landed heavy and cold. I'd spent so long being kind that I'd forgotten how to be strong. That morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her in anger. Not yet. I'd play the role she assigned me, the quiet, harmless guest, but only until I decided otherwise. Because the thing about guests? Sometimes they overstay their welcome. I started observing her more carefully, not as a hurt mother-in-law, but as a strategist. I noticed the way she handled the mail, always intercepting it before David got home. I noticed how she deleted call logs, how she whispered in the hallway late at night, how her smiles for David never reached her eyes. Every small clue was a piece of the puzzle. I began quietly reclaiming small parts of myself. My first act of defiance was subtle, almost laughable, really. I took down the minimalist, soulless art pieces she'd hung in the hallway and replaced them with my old family photos. Photos of Richard holding David as a baby, of the three of us at the lake, of me and Ethan baking cookies. When she noticed, her smile tightened. "Oh," she said lightly, "I thought we agreed to keep things simple." I just smiled back. I prefer memories to minimalism. The tension between us thickened, but I didn't care. Every frame I hung was like reclaiming a piece of my home, a silent reminder that this house had roots deeper than her schemes. I also began quietly gathering evidence. I took photos of her text messages when she left her phone unattended. I printed copies of the property listings she'd emailed to herself. I even contacted the real estate agent, pretending to be Margaret, the property owner. When he realized who I was, the conversation shifted dramatically. "Wait," he said hesitantly, "you're saying you didn't authorize the sale?" "No," I said, my voice steady but cold. "But thank you for confirming who did." I hung up shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. For the first time since Richard's passing, I felt alive, awake, powerful. That night, I stood by the window, looking at the magnolia tree bathed in moonlight. I thought about how trees grow, how their roots push through rock and soil, how they bend in the wind but never break. Growth doesn't come from ease, it comes from resistance. Maybe this was mine. For years, I'd been defined by gentleness. But gentleness without boundaries is weakness, and I wasn't weak anymore. When Vanessa passed me in the hallway the next morning, her tone was as sugary as ever. "Good morning, Margaret," she said. "Sleep well." I met her gaze and smiled faintly. Better than ever. For a split second, I saw it, confusion. Maybe even fear. Because she could sense it too. Something in me had changed. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, organizing, taking inventory. Not because the house needed it, but because I needed clarity. I needed to know what was mine before she tried to take it away. When David came home, I made dinner like always. We laughed, talked about Ethan's school project, and for a few hours, everything felt normal again. But beneath the warmth, a plan was forming. If Vanessa wanted to sell my home, I'd let her think she could. If she wanted to treat me like a guest, I'd act like one, polite, invisible, harmless. Until the moment I wasn't. That night, before bed, I opened my old wooden chest, the one Richard built for me on our first anniversary. Inside were keepsakes, letters, and documents, including the house deed. I traced my name on the paper with my finger and whispered, "Not yet, my love. But I'll protect what's ours." As I folded the deed back into the chest, I caught my reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, gray hair, and a quiet fire burning beneath the wrinkles. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a broken woman. I saw someone who'd been underestimated for far too long. Someone ready to fight back, not with rage, but with purpose. The same woman who once built this home was about to save it. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission. For a week I wore the mask Vanessa gave me, quiet, diminutive, harmless. I made coffee with a smile, cleared the table when she hosted, and nodded at her plans as if I were grateful for crumbs of attention. She loved that mask. It made her bolder. It made her careless. And carelessness is where mistakes live. Revenge, I decided, wouldn't be spectacle. It would be architecture. Build it slow. Build it tight. Make every piece of proof and every ally fit perfectly, so when the house of cards fell, it would fall in the light. Step 1. Lock down the facts. I already had the earliest threads, the text previews, the agent's messages, the once your mother-in-law moves out line that had gutted me. But half-truths can twist in people's mouths. If I was going to break her, I needed incontrovertible evidence. Emails, transfer confirmations, witness statements. No hearsay. Only things that would make her lie crumble under the weight of paper and pixels. I started where she'd been sloppy, her phone. She left it on the counter sometimes, charging, never closing tabs, never thinking. I'd photographed messages before, but this time I copied everything, methodically. Screenshots of listings she'd emailed to herself, timestamps showing when she'd deleted messages, the agent's name and phone number. Each image I printed in crisp black and white and pinned to a board in my bedroom like a wanted poster. Where there was a gap, I filled it. I called the real estate agent again, using my calm voice, introducing myself as Margaret, the property owner, and watched him fumble when he realized he'd been dealing with Vanessa. He confirmed dates, agents, even the buyer's tentative deposit, everything I needed to be certain she'd been moving forward. Next, I turned to people. The sweetest part of a plan is that it doesn't need to be silent. It needs to be shared with the right people. I tapped the one neighbor who'd always had an eye on our street, Mrs. Alvarez, who organized the block's annual bake sale and had a security camera trained on the driveway. She loved our family in a way that made her fierce. I asked for footage for anything showing boxes, removals, or strangers entering and leaving. She obliged, and when I watched the clip of Vanessa carrying boxes toward a late-night car, I felt something icy and clean, confirmation. Then I found a small legal angle. My son's name appeared on the mortgage paperwork in older scans. The deed, however, was a paper document in an oak chest I'd kept. I visited Mr. Beckett, an old friend and the lawyer who'd handled Richard's will years ago. I didn't tell him about revenge. I told him the truth, that I'd discovered conversations indicating someone was trying to move forward with a sale without clear authorization. He listened, his brows knitting, and agreed to check the chain of title. He was careful but direct. If you prove the sale was started without your consent, Margaret, we can stop it. But you'll need solid documentation, dates, correspondences, witness statements. He liked the word solid. So did I. While the legal checks and neighbor footage were in motion, I set emotional traps. Vanessa thrived on her image, polite, stylish, the helpful wife who juggled brunches and PTA. She craved validation from the neighborhood clique. So I planned a Sunday brunch, a gentle social gauntlet where she would perform, and where her performance would be interrupted. I sent quiet invites to her friends and to David's closest colleague under the pretense of appreciation and family togetherness. I said nothing to David about the brunch's purpose. I wanted him there as muscle to my truth when the time came. The greatest weapon in her arsenal was perception. She'd convinced everyone I was fragile, that I'd fade if challenged. So I played it. I let her believe I was the harmless guest, the kindly relic who could be ignored. Behind the smile, however, I was weaving threads. I rehearsed my calm voice, the way I would present the evidence, how I'd let facts land like small, unavoidable stones until the pond rippled. There was one more piece to place, the agent. I'd already baited him, posing as the owner, and he'd confirmed the buyer's interest, but he'd also, under pressure, admitted a fatal flaw. The sale had been started using documents with questionable signatures. That was the crack I needed. If Mr. Beckett could show that Vanessa had misrepresented authority, the buyer would pull out, the agent would retreat, and the town would whisper. Reputation mattered to Vanessa. It would prick her like a splinter. On Thursday night, while Vanessa was at a book club and David at a late meeting, I set the final part of the plan in motion. I arranged the printed emails into a folder, neat, chronological, labeled, and placed it on the dining table where, I knew, people would see it. I made sure the guest list for Sunday included at least 2 of Vanessa's closest friends who loved gossip almost as much as their manicured nails. I told Mrs. Alvarez to bring her camera footage and asked Mr. Beckett to arrive early under the guise of checking a small title question. I did all this while keeping my hands soft and my smile warm when Vanessa brushed past me in the hallway, blissfully certain of her victory. She didn't know I'd contacted the agent. She didn't know the chest in my room contained the deed. She didn't know that I'd spoken to neighbors, lawyers, and strangers who now held pieces of her deception. She thought I was broken. She thought she was clearing me out, quietly, neatly, as you clear debris from a garden. How small she'd made me feel. How foolish she'd been to assume weakness meant invisibility. On Saturday night, I lay out the photographs and documents like a general preparing maps. My hands didn't shake. My breath was steady. For the first time since I'd found her messages, there was not a tremor of helplessness in me, only the cool clarity of someone who has accepted that no one else will ever fully fight for what they love, so they must. Sunday's brunch would not be an ambush. It would be the audit, paper, people, witnesses, and the law waiting politely at the table. Vanessa would still parade her smile and her excuses. But when the right folder slid quietly into view and the video from Mrs. Alvarez's camera began to play, her smile would freeze. I folded my hands and whispered to the house, to Richard's photo on the mantel, to the magnolia outside, "We'll see who leaves the house a guest." And somewhere far upstairs, in a room she thought she ruled, Vanessa planned which dress to wear. She didn't know she'd just RSVP'd to her own unraveling. Sunday morning arrived glossy and ordinary, the kind of day that tricks you into believing nothing will change. I set the table with the good dishes, the ones Richard liked, and arranged the family photos so they caught the light. Everything looked casual, warm, muffins, coffee, sunlight spilling through the curtains. I wanted the scene to feel like any other Sunday, because truth surfaces most cruelly when it appears gentle. Guests arrived on time, neighbors I'd known for years, Mrs. Alvarez with her camera flash tucked in her tote, 2 of Vanessa's glossy friends, their laughter like chipped glass, and David's colleague, Mark, who had a habit of asking the blunt questions others avoided. Mr. Beckett slipped in quietly, Tyascu, carrying a leather folder. Vanessa fluttered about in a new dress, pleased at how much she'd accomplished in a week of manipulation. She glanced at me with that practiced, tiny smile she used when she wanted the world to think I was harmless. She didn't know how harmless I'd allowed myself to be so that I could be precise. We ate for a while, light chatter skimming the surface. Vanessa told a story about a boutique she'd discovered and the lull in which all the neighborhood women chimed approval. I smiled, placed a muffin on a plate, and listened. Every laugh from that table jarred against the quiet drum of my plan, a cadence I'd been rehearsing for days. Then, when the coffee cups had been cleared and the clinking slowed, I pushed the leather folder toward the center of the table and said, as casually as I could, "Mr. Beckett brought something I asked him to look over." Conversation thinned like breath held too long. Vanessa's friends froze mid-sip. Mark looked from me to Mr. Beckett and back again. David's face, when he turned, went an odd shade of pale, the kind of color that announces you're about to lose your balance. Mr. Beckett opened the folder and laid out my printed copies, timestamps, copied emails, the agent's messages, the screenshots of Vanessa's deleted threads. He narrated with that dry legal calm that makes every word sound heavier. "These are dated communications indicating an active effort to list and sell this property," he said. They were initiated without the owner's consent and include references to moving the present occupant. I also confirmed with the listing agent, who has been frank once contacted, that the process was advanced under false pretenses. Vanessa's laugh, brittle before, dissolved. She leaned forward, face tightening into a mask. "That's ridiculous," she said, too quickly. I didn't. That wasn't, Mrs. Alvarez. never one for whispers, reached into her tote and threaded a memory stick into the laptop I'd asked her to bring. The screen filled the room with the grainy footage of Vanessa carrying boxes at 2 in the morning, the timestamp clear as a judge's gavel. There she was, dragging paperbacks and framed prints to a car, slipping them into the trunk while the porch light kept a steady witness. The footage played and replayed in a slow, damning loop. A hand went to David's mouth. He stared at Vanessa as if a new person had materialized between them. Vanessa's face, so carefully tended, finally fell. Her cheeks flushed the color of exposed brick. She clutched at her napkin like a life preserver. I let Mr. Beckett finish. "We can stop the sale," he said. "We will file an injunction today. There are also potential charges for misrepresentation to a real estate agent and, depending on the buyer's actions, fraudulent conveyance." His words were clinical. His tone left no space for theatrics. That was the point. Truth doesn't need fireworks. It lands heavy and the ground gives way. Vanessa tried to interrupt, to gaslight, to spin the story into something about guilt and misunderstanding. At first, she pointed at me as if I'd conjured the scandal from spite. Then Mark, David's colleague, who knew little of our history but much of his friend's character, spoke up. "David, did you know about this?" he asked bluntly. "Your wife has been taking movers at night and corresponding with an agent." The question hung in the air like a verdict. David's world crumpled with the single sound of his name being questioned. He'd loved her well enough to blind himself. Now he sat with the evidence in front of him. He looked at Vanessa, then at me, the confusion in his eyes trying to reconcile wife, mother, and the house he thought he knew. Vanessa's friends fled first, whispering apologies that sounded like excuses. The neighborhood clique, once her audience, scattered like paper in wind. The buyer, contacted by the agent after our call, pulled the offer, nervous, prudent, unwilling to buy a storm-soaked story. The agent, whose name I'd placed gently but irrevocably under pressure, confessed he'd accepted communications from someone claiming authority. His voice, when recorded in the file, trembled with the professional discomfort of a man caught on the wrong side of an ethical line. Vanessa's composure snapped with the shoreline breaking. She stood up, frantic, and began to argue, a flurry of words that dissolved as quickly as they erupted. David stood, his chair scraping like a censored apology. He reached for her hand, then stopped as if realizing for the first time the hollow space between them. I stayed seated. That was important. Fury is loud. Justice can be still. I watched Vanessa unspool, watched her small empire collapse under the weight of facts she'd thought she could hide. The humiliation was not theatrical. It was quieter, the way people watch someone they once admired unravel and realize they were, in fact, never the person they seemed. When the last friend left and David led Vanessa to the front door with a hand that trembled not from anger but from betrayal, she grabbed a suitcase and her phone. I could have screamed at her. I could have spat words that would have burned both of us. But instead I walked to the coat closet, took down a soft blanket Richard had sewn, and draped it over the back of the chair. Vanessa paused in the doorway as neighbors watched. She looked at me, really looked, for the first time since I'd moved in as a guest. There was defiance in her eyes, but also the tiny, raw thing that comes from being exposed, regret, then fright. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The evidence had done the speaking. She left with her bags in hand, the door closing with a soft finality. David didn't follow her. He stood on the threshold, hollow and unmoored, while I stood steady behind the table. The house breathed around us, old wood and familiar light filling the room with a kind of domestic sanctity reclaimed. When the quiet returned, I collected the scattered papers and folded them into the leather folder. I felt no gloating. Revenge had been a precise instrument of protection, not spectacle. I had not humiliated. I had simply allowed truth to show itself in daylight. Later, as I stood beneath the magnolia tree, the leaves whispering above me, Ethan ran up and threw his small arms around my waist. His innocence patched the torn places in my chest. David came out slowly, sat beside me, and for the first time said, not as a child, but as a man, "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have seen it." That night, I packed a small overnight bag and set it by my bedside, not for me, but for the idea that I was ready for whatever came next. I had stood steady while the house trembled and did not fall. The storm had passed, and what remained was stronger for having weathered it. I had been called a guest in my own home. She left as one. The house felt different in the days that followed, quieter, lighter, as if the walls themselves had finally exhaled. For the first time in months, the silence wasn't heavy, it was healing. I'd wake up before sunrise, step into the kitchen, and listen to the birds outside the magnolia tree. The morning light spilled through the curtains just the way it used to when Richard was alive. The kettle would whistle, and the scent of fresh tea would fill the room. Simple things, ordinary things, but now they meant everything. Vanessa was gone. Completely. She'd moved in with her sister across town, though word spread quickly about what had happened that Sunday. The story traveled through the neighborhood like wind through the trees, a tale of deceit, discovery, and justice served without shouting. People called, dropped by with casseroles and condolences, whispered how they never trusted her smile. I didn't gloat or gossip. I'd learned that real revenge isn't loud, it's living well when someone wanted to see you broken. David, meanwhile, was quiet too. He'd taken time off work, spending most of it with Ethan. I'd watch them build Lego towers on the rug and think about how, no matter how badly life falls apart, some pieces always find their way back together. He apologized again and again, sometimes in words, sometimes in the way he'd refill my teacup or fix the loose hinge on the back door. "Mom," he said one evening, "you were right. You always saw the truth before I did." I smiled softly. "That's what mothers do, David. We see what love tries to hide." There was no bitterness in my voice. Just peace, the kind that comes after a long, necessary storm. Weeks passed. I found new rhythms. I replanted the magnolia tree's base with white lilies, the same flowers Richard had brought me every anniversary. I started hosting small Sunday gatherings again, not to flaunt, but to fill the home with laughter that came from genuine hearts. When neighbors would ask how I'd managed to stay so calm through it all, I'd simply say, because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest strength. And it was true. For so long, I'd believed strength was about endurance, about holding on no matter what. But this experience taught me that real strength is also knowing when to let go. I had let go of fear, of self-doubt, of the idea that kindness meant silence. That house, my house, had been both battlefield and sanctuary. I'd been betrayed in my own home, but I also rediscovered who I was within its walls. I wasn't just a guest. I was the foundation. And when Vanessa tried to uproot me, all she did was remind me how deeply my roots ran. A month later, a letter came in the mail from Vanessa. The handwriting was shaky, unsteady. She apologized for everything, for her greed, her lies, her arrogance. She said losing the house made her realize she'd never owned anything real in her life, not love, not trust, not even peace. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in Richard's old chest. Not out of forgiveness, but closure. Some lessons are too heavy to carry around. It's better to set them down somewhere safe. That night, I sat under the magnolia tree with a cup of tea and the moonlight washing over the garden. The petals above shimmered like memories, delicate but unbroken. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the anger, the quiet strength that rose from it all. And I realized something: life will test you through the people closest to you. It will break your heart in the rooms you built with love. But it will also hand you the power to rebuild, wiser, braver, and softer in the right places. The woman I was before all this would have cried herself to sleep, wondering what she'd done wrong. The woman I became simply smiled at the stars and whispered, "Thank you for showing me what I was capable of." Vanessa may have walked away with her bags, but I walked away with something far more valuable: my self-respect. She thought she was evicting me from my life. But in the end, I was the one who showed her the door. And that's poetic justice. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own story, if someone once treated you like you didn't belong, remember this: your worth isn't defined by how they see you, but by how you rise after they try to tear you down. Have you ever faced betrayal and found the strength to stand tall again? Share your story in the comments. your voice might just be the one that helps someone else find theirs. And if you believe in quiet strength, poetic justice, and the power of reclaiming your life, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story.